You know, last year was all about the ACC. I mean, let's be honest. National champion, Heisman Trophy. They were 8-3 in their 11 bowl games, 10-4 against the SEC. But the big question is, can they sustain that and be the top conference in America? Let's hear from some of the coaches out there before we hear from our insiders.
I think we've established ourselves as, I think, the premier conference in college football.
We're in the ACC, the best conference in college football. That's not even debatable anymore.
The Southeastern Conference remains the premier conference.
I think this is probably the best league from a competitive venue standpoint.
Well, I don't think there's a gap at all. And that's no disrespect to other conferences.
There's one conference that had a winning record versus Power 5 teams, the ACC. One conference had a winning record versus ranked teams, the ACC.
Coaches across all these media days touting their own conference. And when you think about, it's always been the SEC and everybody else trying to catch them. You know, one year you have a Pac-12, one year you have the Big Ten. Mark, you know, it's not really a flash in the pan with the ACC. 19-13 in the last 3 years against the SEC. Is it sustainable for the ACC?
I think it is. Clemson's going to have to do it without Deshaun Watson. I think Florida State, obviously under Jimbo Fisher, is here to stay. Mark Richt has got Miami coming up. If he can find a quarterback, Virginia Tech, Justin Fuente, they're going to have to replace a boatload of players. But I just think right now, quarterback play is the big thing. The SEC's falling behind. Can guys like Jacob Eason, Jarrett Stidham get those teams, Georgia and Auburn and some others, up with Alabama? Because right now, the SEC is a one-horse race.
You need that second team. That's what happened with the ACC. Clemson rose up to match Florida State. The Big Ten still waiting for that with Ohio State. The SEC, which had that incredible run of national titles, it was different teams. Now it's just Alabama. The Pac-12, are they hoping that USC is that second team to Washington? Oklahoma is the only alpha dog in the Big 12. So that's what the ACC has captured. That's what every other league is searching for.
You know, I could argue that the Big Ten was top-heavy, though, last year when you talk about Ohio State and Penn State battling to get into the college football playoff right to the final weekend, and Michigan was right there as well. Those three teams in the Big Ten could make an argument, hey, we're just as good as everybody else across the country.
Well, and one reason that the ACC has been so good, though, is because of the coaching stability. And, you know, Jimbo Fisher said at one point the Big Ten looked like the best conference in college football last year, but how did you finish? So I do think the ACC can sustain it, but I also think that the SEC better hope that LSU and Auburn live up to the hype of their rankings, because you're looking at a coach at Auburn that's under pressure to live up to expectations, a new coach at LSU looking to regain the expectations there, and Ed Orgeron. So I think that the SEC has to close a gap a bit. In terms of what
but the SEC's has some great opportunities early to restore dominance. I mean, Florida against Michigan, Alabama against Florida State, Georgia goes to Notre Dame, Auburn goes to Clemson. SEC could go 4-0.
And they have the most capable teams. You just look at those programs, the way they recruit, how they invest. Certainly the coaching might have dropped off a little bit in recent years, but you think about leagues, how many teams are capable of winning a national championship?
Right.
I still think the SEC, with the history at Florida, LSU, Auburn even getting there, winning one, losing another in the title game, and certainly Alabama, there's a lot of programs that have that capability.
You know, Heather, Adam was talking about the alpha dogs, the top two teams. I mean, can you now this year envision two teams getting into the college football playoff? Because maybe Big 12 might be down a little bit, Pac-12 might be down a little bit. You've got the ACC now with a Florida State, a Clemson, you know, right there. Possible Alabama, if that other second team, maybe an LSU, jumps up.
The only way that happens in my mind is if Florida State beats Alabama and Clemson beats Auburn. I think you're starting off with two top 5 teams. If they can stay there, heck yeah, one of them can get a boost into the top 4. The catch-22 is when they start beating the same teams, because they're both going to play Louisville, they're both going to play NC State. Florida State plays Miami and Florida, which is really a notch in their belt, especially if they beat Alabama to start. But it's a catch-22, because Louisville's a ranked team until it loses to Florida State, until it loses to Clemson. Then what happens?
I still think the SEC, Alabama benefit of the doubt is still out there. If Alabama, slips up, somehow doesn't get in the SEC championship game, kind of like Ohio State last year, could they get in as a second team along with the SEC champion? The other one, and this is maybe a little out there, but Wisconsin runs the table and beats an Ohio State team that's also undefeated in that Big Ten championship game. What do you do with Ohio State, which would have wins over Oklahoma, Penn State, and Michigan?
Well, Wisconsin should run the table with that schedule.
To Heather's point, though, Alabama, They need LSU and Auburn to be good. And is Michigan going to be as good
Absolutely.
after losing all those guys
Question.
to the NFL draft? I mean, with 2 losses, Alabama with that schedule, I don't know.
Yeah, when you look at the Big Ten, it's a great point. If a team goes undefeated, you can't leave them out. But then you think about Ohio State last year, kind of getting in, kind of sneaking in, and then getting hammered by Clemson the way they did. Obviously, the committee's not going to look at last year compared to this year, but do you think that subconsciously kind of sticks into people's minds of rewarding a team that doesn't win their championship and a team that is not undefeated in getting to the college football playoff?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that the selection committee members would tell you that they have no regrets about what they did last year about that, because they honestly believe that they sweated out until 2 a.m., whatever that day was, December 4th or whatever, to do the right thing. And they leave there, no matter what happened in that Ohio State game, they say, okay, but look, yes, of course, if you're going to make a decision like that, you're going to think twice and say, hold on now, is Florida State really the best team in the ACC, even though it may have lost to Clemson, but it beat Alabama? What if that happens in the ACC this year?
No question about it.
What if Florida State beats Alabama, loses a close one to Clemson?
But they've gone out of their way to say that conference championships matter. And to go 2 years in a row to put a team in the playoff without having won
That's
its
why
conference,
it has to be stuck in their head.
it's going to be very difficult to continue to push that rhetoric of conference championships as the tiebreaker above everything else.
All right, now